The scream that tore through the birthing hut was not one of joy. It was a scream of horror. Ilara had just been born, and the room had gone cold in an instant. The midwife stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a bowl of water. The candles flickered, as if a wind had entered, though every door was shut. "Her eyes," the midwife whispered. "Look at her eyes." The newborn's eyes were dark, plain, ordinary brown, with no flicker of gold, no shimmer of silver, none of the glowing light that every wolf-born child carried the moment they took their first breath. In the Moonfall Pack, that glow was sacred. It meant a wolf spirit lived inside the child, waiting to grow, waiting to one day take its place beside the human half of its soul. Every child born in the pack had that light, every single one, for 300 years. Except this one. Ilara's mother, a gentle woman named Wilhelmina, pressed her daughter to her chest, refusing to believe what she was hearing. "She is tired," Wilhelmina said, her voice shaking. "Babies do not always show the light right away. Give her a moment, please, give her a moment." But the midwife would not look at the child again. She backed out of the room, calling for the pack elders, calling for the beta. Ilara's father, Garrick, arrived within minutes, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his face pale with disbelief. He was the beta of Moonfall Pack, second only to the alpha, a proud man who had spent his whole life following the old laws without question. He looked at his newborn daughter, searching for the glow that should have been shining in her eyes. There was nothing, just quiet, dark, ordinary eyes staring back at him. "She is wolfless," Garrick said, and the words came out flat, empty, as if he had already decided her fate before she had lived even an hour. Wilhelmina begged him not to say it, not to believe it, but the pack elders had already gathered outside the hut, murmuring among themselves, their voices sharp with fear. A wolfless child had not been born into their pack in living memory. Some elders whispered that it was a curse. Others whispered that it meant something even worse, that a child without a wolf spirit was not truly one of them at all, that she was something unnatural, something dangerous. By morning, the entire pack had heard the news. Whispers spread through Moonfall like fire through dry grass. Some parents pulled their children away when Wilhelmina walked past with the baby wrapped in blankets. Others refused to even look at her. Garrick stood before the pack council that same day, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet his wife's pleading gaze. The elders demanded a decision. A wolfless child could not be raised within packlands. It went against everything they believed. It threatened the balance the pack had protected for centuries. "She must be removed," said the eldest elder, a stern woman named Old Bertha, her voice cold and final. "Before her presence brings misfortune upon us all." Wilhelmina fell to her knees, clutching her daughter, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. "She is a baby," she cried. "She has done nothing. She is my daughter." But no one moved to comfort her. No one spoke in her defense. The pack had already made its judgment, and pack law was absolute. That night, under a sky heavy with clouds and no visible moon, 2 guards came to take the child. Wilhelmina fought them with everything she had, screaming, clawing, begging. But she was only human in that moment, weak against the strength of trained wolves. They pried the infant from her arms while she collapsed onto the frozen ground, her cries echoing through the trees long after they had gone. Garrick did not stop them. He stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded, his face carved from stone, watching his own daughter be carried away into the darkness of the forest that bordered human lands. He told himself it was for the good of the pack. He told himself it was the only way. But even as the guards disappeared beyond the tree line, something inside him cracked, something he would spend years trying to bury. The guards left the baby at the very edge of the territory, beneath an old oak tree, where the pack lands ended and the human world began. It was pack tradition, ancient and cruel, that wolfless children were not to be killed directly, only abandoned to fate. If they survived, it was said to be the will of the moon. If they did not, it was said to be justice. The baby was left alone in the cold, wrapped in a thin blanket, crying into the empty night. Hours passed. The cold grew sharper, the crying grew weaker. Then, just before dawn, a figure emerged from the trees, moving slowly, leaning on a wooden staff. She was an old woman, with silver hair pulled into a tight braid, her eyes sharp despite her age, her face weathered by decades of living alone in the woods. She was known to both wolves and humans as Old Mira, a healer who lived on the border between two worlds, trusted by neither side completely, yet needed by both. Mira had felt something pulling her out of her cottage that night, a strange sensation she could not explain, like a whisper carried on the wind. She followed it through the trees until she found the crying infant beneath the oak tree, abandoned and shivering. She knelt down slowly, her joints protesting the movement, and looked into the baby's eyes. Ordinary brown eyes, no glow, no light, just a small, frightened child left to die in the cold. "You poor thing," Mira whispered, lifting the baby into her arms. "What did you do to deserve this?" She wrapped her own shawl around the infant, holding her close, as she made her way back to her cottage, her steps quicker now despite her age. As she walked, she felt something strange pass through her fingertips, where they touched the baby's skin. A faint warmth, almost like a pulse of energy, gone as quickly as it came. Mira paused, frowning, studying the child's face more closely. "There is something in you," she murmured, "something they could not see." She did not know what it meant, not yet, but she knew, with the certainty that came from decades of healing and studying old magic, that this child was not what the pack believed her to be. A curse did not feel like warmth. A curse did not pulse with quiet, gentle energy. Whatever lived inside this baby, it was something else entirely, something old, something the pack elders had never encountered before, because it had not been born among them in centuries. Mira decided, in that moment, walking through the frost-covered trees with the infant pressed against her chest, that she would raise this child herself. She would keep her safe, hidden from both the pack that had rejected her and the humans who might fear her if the truth of her origins ever became known. She named her Alara, after a star her own mother had once shown her as a child, a star that shined brightest when everything else in the sky had gone dark. The years that followed were quiet ones, spent in a small cottage nestled between the pack territory and the human village of Ashwell. Mira taught Alara everything she knew about herbs, about healing, about the delicate balance between the wolf world and the human one. She taught her to read, to write, to observe everything around her with careful, patient eyes. But she never taught her about her true origins. Not yet. Alara grew up believing she was simply an orphan, a child left behind by parents she would never know, raised by a kind old healer who had taken pity on her. She did not know about the pack's judgment, about the cruel tradition that had left her beneath that oak tree to die. She only knew the quiet rhythm of life with Mira, tending herbs in the garden, learning the names of plants and their uses, listening to stories by the fire on cold winter nights. Yet even without knowing the truth, Alara always felt different. She healed strangely fast. A cut that should have taken a week to close would vanish within a single day. A fever that gripped her tightly one evening would be gone entirely by morning, leaving no trace it had ever existed. Mira watched these moments carefully, saying nothing, filing each observation away in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. There was something else too, something harder to explain. Alara could sense things about people. She would look into someone's eyes and simply know if they were sad, or frightened, or hiding something painful beneath a calm expression. It unsettled the villagers of Ashwell, who found her presence uncomfortable, though they could never quite say why. "You must be careful," Mira told her one evening, as they sat together by the fire, the flames casting long shadows across the cottage walls. "Do not let others see how quickly you heal. Do not let them see how deeply you understand their feelings. People fear what they cannot explain." "Why am I different?" Alara asked, her voice small, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She was still young then, no older than 7, but the question had clearly been sitting heavy on her mind for some time. Mira paused, studying the girl's face for a long moment before answering carefully. "I do not know everything," she said honestly, "but I believe you are meant for something greater than this quiet life we live. When the time comes, you will understand. Until then, patience is your greatest strength." Alara accepted this answer, though it did not fully satisfy her curiosity. She continued growing up in the shadow of two worlds, never fully belonging to either one, always watching, always sensing, always healing faster than she should. The years passed slowly, gently, the way seasons change without anyone quite noticing, until the trees are suddenly bare or suddenly green again. Alara grew from a curious child into a quiet, thoughtful young woman, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her calm demeanor hiding a strength she did not yet fully understand. She did not know that far beyond the cottage, in the halls of Moonfall Pack, her father Garrick still carried the weight of what he had done, a weight that grew heavier with each passing year, though he never spoke of it to anyone. She did not know that her mother Wilhelmina had never stopped grieving, had never remarried, had spent every single night since that terrible evening, wondering if her daughter had survived. She did not know that far beyond even the Packlands, in a grand stone keep at the heart of the 5 wolf kingdoms, a young Alpha King named Kalen Thorn was growing into his role, unaware that his own fate had already begun quietly weaving itself together with hers, though neither of them knew it yet. All Elara knew was the quiet cottage, the herb garden, the old healer, who had raised her with kindness, despite the cruelty of the world beyond their small clearing. She knew nothing of the storm that was coming, nothing of the decree that would soon drag her out of hiding and into the center of a kingdom on the edge of war. But destiny, it seemed, had not forgotten her, and soon it would come looking. The first time Elara understood how cruel the world could be, she was 10 years old, standing in the market square of Ashwell, clutching a small basket of herbs Mira had asked her to sell. A group of children ran past her, laughing, playing some game that involved chasing a wooden hoop down the cobblestone street. One of them, a boy with messy blonde hair named Peter, stopped suddenly when he saw her, his eyes narrowing. "That's the strange girl," he said loudly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The one old Mira found in the woods. My mother says she isn't right." The other children slowed, staring at her with curious, uncertain expressions. Elara felt her face grow warm, felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever people looked at her that way, as though she were something to be studied rather than someone to be known. "I'm not strange," she said quietly, though her voice wavered. "Then why do you never get sick?" Peter pressed, stepping closer. "Why did you heal so fast when you fell off the fence last spring? My brother saw it. He said your arm looked broken, and the next morning it was fine, like nothing happened." Elara had no answer for him. She simply lowered her eyes and walked away as quickly as she could, her basket of herbs forgotten, her heart pounding with a familiar mixture of shame and confusion. She did not understand why she was different, only that being different made her a target, made her the subject of whispers and sideways glances no matter where she went. When she returned to the cottage that evening, tears streaking her face, Mira set down the herbs she had been sorting and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "They are cruel because they do not understand," Mira said softly, stroking Elara's hair. "Cruelty is often just fear wearing a different mask." "Why can't I just be normal?" Elara whispered into the old woman's shoulder. Mira was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Normal is a small thing, Elara. You were not made for small things." Elara did not understand what that meant, not truly, not at 10 years old, but she held on to those words anyway, repeating them to herself in the years that followed, whenever the whispers grew too loud, whenever the isolation grew too heavy. The children of Ashwell grew into adults who still remembered the strange girl from the woods, still whispered about her unnatural healing, her quiet, watchful eyes, her unsettling ability to seem to know exactly what someone was feeling before they said a single word. She was never invited to gatherings, never included in celebrations, never given the chance to simply belong. The wolves of Moonfall Pack were worse, when she encountered them at all. Occasionally, hunting parties would pass near the edge of the human village, and pack members would catch sight of her working in Mira's garden, or walking along the tree line collecting herbs. They would stare at her with open suspicion, sometimes with open discomfort, as though her very presence unsettled something sacred within them. She did not know, of course, that many of them recognized exactly who she was. The story of the wolfless child abandoned beneath the old oak tree had never fully faded from pack memory, even as the years passed. Some of the older wolves who had been present that terrible night would catch a glimpse of her dark, ordinary eyes and feel a chill run through them, remembering the cruel judgment that had sent an infant into the cold to die. Mira, sensing the growing tension whenever pack members came near, began training Elara more seriously as she entered her teenage years. Not just in herbalism and healing, but in quiet movement, in awareness, in the subtle art of making herself unnoticed. "You must learn to move through a crowd without drawing eyes," Mira told her one afternoon, as they walked together through the dense forest that separated their cottage from the nearest pack border. Not because you should be ashamed of who you are, but because the world is not ready to understand you yet. Until it is, you must protect yourself. Ilara absorbed these lessons eagerly, hungry for any skill that might help her navigate a world that seemed determined to reject her. She learned to move silently through underbrush, to read the subtle signs of tension in the behavior of animals and people alike, to sense danger in a room before a single word was spoken. Her gift for sensing emotions grew stronger as well, sharper, more precise. She could look at a stranger passing through the village and know instantly whether they carried grief or worry or something hidden beneath a calm expression. It was a skill that unsettled everyone who noticed it, but it was also, Ilara began to realize, a skill that could protect her, that could warn her when trouble approached, long before it arrived. Mira noticed these developments with quiet fascination, though she said little about what they might mean. She had her own theories, formed over years of careful observation and half-remembered stories from her own childhood, tales of ancient bloodlines and dormant powers that had not been spoken of in the pack world for centuries. But she kept these theories to herself, unwilling to burden Ilara with possibilities that might never come to pass. "Why do you never speak of my parents?" Ilara asked one evening, when she was 16, sitting across from Mira at their small wooden table, a bowl of stew growing cold between them. Mira's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something careful and guarded passing behind her eyes. "I do not know much about them," she said, which was, in its own way, the truth. She truly did not know the names of Ilara's birth parents, only the circumstances of how the infant had come to be abandoned beneath that oak tree. "Do you think they are still alive?" Ilara pressed, her voice quieter now. "I believe," Mira said slowly, "that everything happens for reasons we do not always understand right away. Perhaps one day, the answers will find you, when you are ready to face them." Ilara did not push further, though the question lingered in her mind for years afterward, a quiet ache she carried alongside the isolation and the strange gifts she could not fully explain. By the time she turned 18, Ilara had become something of a shadow in the village of Ashwell, present but unseen, known but not understood. She spent her days helping Mira tend to the sick, gathering herbs from the forest, practicing the quiet skills she had spent years perfecting. She had grown tall and steady, her dark hair often pulled back in a simple braid, her eyes carrying a quiet wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. She did not know that beyond the borders of Ashwell, in the grand stone halls of the royal keep that ruled over all 5 wolf kingdoms, changes were stirring that would soon reach even her quiet, hidden corner of the world. Word had begun spreading through every pack territory, carried by messengers on horseback, whispered in taverns, discussed anxiously around dinner tables. Tensions were rising between the 5 kingdoms, and a growing faction of rogue shifters who had abandoned pack law entirely, choosing instead to live by no rules at all, raiding villages, disrupting trade, threatening the fragile peace that had held the wolf world together for generations. The Alpha King, a young and formidable leader named Kalen Thorne, had taken the throne only a few years prior, following the sudden passing of his father. He was known throughout the kingdoms for his strength, his sharp intelligence, and a beast so powerful that few dared challenge him directly. But he was also known, in quieter whispers, for a temper that ran as fierce as his loyalty, a man who had lost much in a short time, and carried the weight of it with a controlled, simmering intensity. To address the growing threat of the rogue shifters, Kalen had issued a sweeping decree, one that would ripple through every pack territory in the kingdom, including the quiet border regions where humans and wolves lived in uneasy proximity. Every unclaimed wolf-born citizen, the decree stated, must be registered and tested for pack allegiance. Every young man and woman of age, regardless of their standing, was to present themselves before pack officials for evaluation, ensuring that no rogue sympathizers or hidden threats could slip through the cracks during a time of such uncertainty. Ilara knew nothing of this decree yet. She spent that particular morning in the garden, kneeling in the soft earth, carefully pulling weeds from around a patch of healing herbs Mira relied on for her most delicate remedies. The sun was warm against her back, the air filled with the gentle hum of insects, and the distant sound of birds calling to one another in the trees. She had no way of knowing that this quiet, ordinary morning would be one of the last she would spend in peaceful obscurity. Because far beyond the tree line, moving steadily closer to Ashwell with each passing hour, a group of pack soldiers had already been dispatched to gather every remaining citizen for testing, and someone in the pack council, remembering an old, cruel story about a wolfless child abandoned beneath an oak tree many years before, had specifically requested that the healer's ward be brought before the testing altar as well. Not to be registered, but to be made an example of. The soldiers arrived at midday, their horses kicking up dust along the narrow road that led into Ashwell. There were 6 of them, dressed in the dark leather armor of Moonfall Pack, their faces hard and unreadable as they moved through the village, calling out names from a long scroll of parchment. Ilara heard the commotion before she saw it, the sound of hooves and raised voices drifting through the open cottage window. She set down the mortar and pestle she had been using to grind dried chamomile and moved to the doorway, watching as villagers gathered nervously in the street, whispering among themselves. "What is happening?" she asked a passing neighbor, an older woman named Margaret who had always treated her with more kindness than most. "The king's decree," Margaret said, her voice tight with worry. "Every young person must be tested. They say it is because of the rogue shifters, that they need to know who can be trusted." Ilara felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She had heard whispers of the decree over the past few days, carried by travelers passing through the village, but she had not truly believed it would reach someone like her, someone who had spent her entire life on the very edges of pack society, forgotten by nearly everyone. She was wrong. A soldier approached the cottage directly, his eyes scanning the small scroll in his hand, before lifting to meet hers. "Ilara, ward of the healer known as Mira," he said, his voice flat and official. "You are required to present yourself at the testing grounds within the hour." "There must be some mistake," Ilara said carefully, keeping her voice steady, despite the panic rising in her chest. "I am not part of any pack. I was never claimed." "That is precisely why you must be tested," the soldier replied. "Unclaimed citizens pose the greatest risk. Orders are orders." Mira emerged from the cottage at that moment, her sharp eyes taking in the scene immediately. She stepped between the soldier and Ilara, her posture calm but firm. "She has no wolf spirit," Mira said clearly. "She was declared wolfless at birth. There is nothing to test." The soldier's expression flickered with something like recognition, and Ilara noticed it immediately, the way his eyes narrowed slightly, the way his jaw tightened. He knew something. He knew exactly who she was. "All the more reason she must come," he said quietly. "Orders from the council specifically named her. I suggest you do not resist." Ilara felt Mira's hand find hers, gripping tightly, and she understood in that moment that there was no escaping what was about to happen. Whatever waited for her at the testing grounds, it had been planned, arranged, expected, long before this soldier had ever arrived at their door. "I will come with her," Mira said firmly. "That is not permitted," the soldier replied. "Only those being tested may enter the grounds." Mira's grip on Ilara's hand tightened even further, and for a moment, Ilara saw real fear in the old healer's eyes, a fear she had never witnessed before, not once in 18 years of living together. It frightened her more than anything the soldier had said. "Whatever happens," Mira whispered, pulling Ilara close for just a moment, "remember who you are. Remember that you are not what they say you are. You never were." Ilara did not fully understand the weight of those words, not yet, but she nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat, and allowed the soldiers to lead her toward the horses waiting at the edge of the village. The ride to the testing grounds took nearly 2 hours, winding through dense forest paths that Ilara had never traveled before, deeper into pack territory than she had ever been allowed to go. The soldiers said little during the journey, occasionally exchanging glances that made her stomach twist with unease. When they finally arrived, Ilara found herself standing before a massive stone amphitheater carved into the side of a hill, ancient and imposing, clearly built centuries before by hands far more skilled than any she could imagine. Hundreds of people had already gathered, young men and women from every corner of the 5 kingdoms, all waiting anxiously for their turn to be tested. At the center of the amphitheater stood a raised stone platform, and upon it, a single altar, carved from dark, smooth rock, glowing faintly, with an ancient magic Ilara could not name. This, she realized with a growing sense of dread, was the testing altar, the place where every wolf-born citizen would prove their allegiance, prove the strength of the spirit living inside them. She was led to a holding area alongside dozens of other young people, all murmuring nervously among themselves. some clearly nervous about failing the test, others confident in their strength. Elara stood apart from them, silent, watching, feeling the weight of curious stares as words spread quietly through the crowd about who she was. "That's her," someone whispered nearby. "The wolfless girl. I heard she was left to die as a baby. Why would they bring her here?" Another voice murmured. "There's nothing to test." Elara kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the whispers reach her, though each word landed like a small stone against her chest. She had endured whispers her entire life, but never so many at once, never in a place so unfamiliar, so clearly designed to make her feel small. Hours passed as testing began, one citizen after another climbing the stone platform to place their hand upon the altar. Elara watched from a distance as each person's eyes flashed with a brief burst of color: gold, silver, deep amber, confirming the wolf spirit living within them, before pack officials recorded their results and moved them along. She noticed, too, the raised platform at the far end of the amphitheater, where a throne, carved from dark stone, sat empty, awaiting its occupant. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the hour grew late, anticipation building for the arrival of someone important, though Elara did not yet understand who. "The king is coming," a young man near her whispered excitedly to his companion. "Alpha King Kalen himself. He oversees the most important testings personally, especially for citizens near the border regions." Elara's stomach tightened at the mention of the king. She had heard stories of him, of course, tales that traveled even to quiet villages like Ashwell, stories of his strength, his fierce beast, his unforgiving reputation when it came to threats against the kingdom. She had never imagined she would find herself standing in the same place as him, let alone under such circumstances. A hush fell over the crowd as a procession of guards entered the amphitheater, moving with practiced precision toward the raised platform at the far end. And then, walking calmly among them, dressed in dark, simple clothing that somehow radiated more authority than any elaborate armor could have, was the Alpha King himself. Elara felt something strange the moment her eyes found him, a sensation she could not immediately name, a subtle pull deep within her chest that made no logical sense at all. She had never seen him before, had no reason to feel anything toward a stranger, yet something inside her recognized him, or perhaps recognized something connected to him, in a way she could not begin to understand. Kalen Thorne moved with quiet, controlled power, his sharp eyes scanning the amphitheater with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned long ago never to let his guard down. He was younger than Elara had expected, though the weight of leadership showed clearly in the tension of his shoulders, the seriousness carved into his expression. He settled onto the stone throne, and the testing resumed, though Elara noticed the atmosphere had shifted, grown more formal, more careful, as citizens climbed the platform under the direct observation of their king. She watched, transfixed, despite herself, as the process continued for another hour, each result met with murmured approval, or quiet concern, depending on the strength of the wolf spirit revealed. She noticed, too, a large wolf, pacing restlessly at the base of the king's throne, its fur dark as midnight, its eyes carrying an intelligence that seemed almost human. This, she realized, must be the king's own beast, the very creature whispered about across the kingdoms for its ferocity and power. The wolf's presence unsettled everyone nearby, guards keeping careful distance, other citizens avoiding eye contact with the massive creature entirely. Yet Elara found herself watching it with quiet fascination rather than fear, noticing the way it moved, the way its dark eyes occasionally swept across the crowd, as though searching for something specific. Finally, as the sun began sinking lower in the sky, a pack official called out a name that made Elara's heart stop entirely. Elara, ward of Mira the healer. The crowd around her grew suddenly silent, hundreds of eyes turning toward her, whispers rippling through the amphitheater like a wave. She felt her legs move forward almost against her will, carrying her toward the stone platform, where the ancient altar waited, glowing faintly in the fading light. She could feel the king's gaze settle on her as she climbed the steps, could feel the weight of his attention alongside the curious stares of everyone gathered to watch. And there, at the base of the throne, she noticed the great black wolf had gone suddenly, unnaturally still, its ears pricked forward, its dark eyes locked entirely on her. Whispers grew louder around the amphitheater, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd as people began to recognize her, began to remember the old story of the wolfless child, left to die beneath an oak tree many years before. "Why is she here?" someone called out from the crowd. "She has no wolf to test." A pack official standing near the altar smiled thinly, a smile that held no warmth at all. "Let us see for certain," he said, his voice carrying across the silent amphitheater. "Place your hand upon the altar, girl. Let everyone witness what you truly are." Alara's heart pounded against her ribs as she stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she reached toward the smooth, dark stone of the altar. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting, some with curiosity, most with quiet, cruel anticipation, expecting her humiliation to finally be made official before the entire kingdom. She closed her eyes for just a moment, remembering Mira's words from earlier that day. "Remember who you are. Remember that you are not what they say you are. You never were." And then, taking a slow breath, Alara pressed her palm flat against the ancient stone. The moment Alara's palm touched the altar, the entire amphitheater seemed to hold its breath. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The stone remained dark and silent beneath her hand, just as it had for every wolfless citizen tested before her throughout history. The pack official who had summoned her forward smiled thinly, already opening his mouth to declare her failure before the gathered crowd. Then the stone began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer, barely visible at first, easy to dismiss as a trick of the fading sunlight. But within seconds, the glow deepened, spreading outward from beneath her palm in slow, pulsing waves of gold, brighter and richer than any color the gathered citizens had ever witnessed during a testing. Gasps rippled through the amphitheater as the light grew stronger, illuminating Alara's face, casting long shadows across the stone platform. The pack official who had summoned her stumbled backward, his earlier smile replaced by open shock. "That is not possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising murmurs of the crowd. Alara stared down at her glowing hand, her own confusion mirroring the astonishment rippling through everyone watching. She had expected nothing, had braced herself for the same cold, empty silence that had defined her entire life. Instead, golden light poured from beneath her palm, warm and steady, unlike anything described in any story she had ever heard about wolf spirits or pack testing. But the golden light was only the beginning. At the base of the king's throne, the great black wolf suddenly rose to its full height, its massive frame tensing, its dark eyes locking onto Alara with an intensity that sent a visible ripple of fear through the nearby guards. Several soldiers instinctively reached for their weapons, clearly anticipating some kind of aggressive reaction from the notoriously fierce creature. Instead, the wolf did something no one in the amphitheater had ever witnessed before. It lowered its head. Slowly, deliberately, the great beast bowed low before her, its powerful body sinking down in a gesture of submission so profound, so unexpected, that the entire crowd fell into stunned, complete silence. This was not the posture of a wolf yielding to danger. This was the posture of recognition, of deep, instinctive respect, the kind shown only to a superior, to someone of significant power and standing within the pack world. Kalen Thorne rose from his throne immediately, his expression shifting from calm authority to something far more alert, far more unsettled. His beast, the very creature that had never once bowed to anyone but him, that had shown nothing but controlled ferocity toward every citizen who had ever approached the throne, was kneeling before a girl the pack council had declared wolfless at birth. "Impossible," Kalen muttered under his breath, moving quickly down the steps of his throne, his sharp eyes fixed on the golden light still radiating from Alara's palm. The pack official nearby scrambled forward, clearly attempting to regain control of the rapidly unraveling situation. "This must be some trick," he stammered, though his voice carried far less conviction than his words suggested. "Some form of dark magic. She should not be permitted near the altar at all." "Silence," Kalen commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with sharp authority. The official immediately fell quiet, along with the rest of the murmuring crowd. Kalen approached the stone platform slowly, his eyes moving between Alara's glowing hand and his own beast, still kneeling in submission at the base of his throne. He had never witnessed anything like this in his entire life, and judging by the shocked silence of the pack elders gathered nearby, neither had they. "Remove your hand from the altar," Kalen instructed, his voice quieter now, though still carrying clear authority. Alara obeyed immediately, pulling her palm away from the smooth stone. The golden light faded slowly, retreating back into the altar, until only ordinary darkness remained, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Yet the memory of what everyone had witnessed lingered heavily in the air, impossible to deny or explain away. The great black wolf remained kneeling for a moment longer, before rising slowly, shaking itself, as though clearing away confusion, then retreating to stand beside Kaelin's leg, though its dark eyes continued watching Alara with unmistakable interest. "What is your name?" Kaelin asked, studying her carefully, his expression unreadable. "Alara," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt, though her heart continued pounding wildly against her ribs. "Ward of Mira the Healer." "You were declared wolfless at birth," Kaelin said, though it was not quite a question. "Yet the altar responded to you, in a way I have never witnessed in my entire life, and my own beast has never once shown submission to anyone beyond myself." Alara had no answer for him. She simply stood there, uncertain, aware of hundreds of eyes still watching her, aware of the growing unease rippling through the gathered pack, elders and officials, many of whom were now whispering urgently among themselves. "This girl must be examined further," one of the older elders called out, stepping forward with obvious concern etched across his weathered face. "Whatever this is, it cannot be allowed to remain a mystery. If it is dangerous, we must know immediately." Kaelin nodded slowly, though his eyes remained fixed on Alara, studying her with an intensity that made her feel strangely exposed, as though he were trying to see straight through to whatever lay hidden beneath her ordinary appearance. "She will be brought to the royal keep," Kaelin announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent amphitheater. "I will oversee this matter personally." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd at this declaration, though no one dared voice open objection to the king's decision. Alara felt a fresh wave of panic rising within her, the realization settling in that whatever had just happened, whatever strange power had revealed itself through the ancient altar, it had irrevocably changed the course of her life, in ways she could not yet begin to understand. "I need to speak with my guardian," Alara said, finding her voice despite the fear coursing through her. "She should be told what has happened." Kaelin considered this for a moment, before nodding once. "Send word to the healer known as Mira," he instructed one of his guards. "Inform her that her ward will be escorted safely to the royal keep, and that she is welcome to follow if she wishes." The guard nodded and hurried off to fulfill the order, while Alara remained standing on the stone platform, surrounded by murmuring citizens and uncertain pack officials, the weight of everyone's shocked attention pressing down on her like a physical force. As she was led carefully down from the platform, guided by two guards toward a waiting carriage, Alara caught sight of the great black wolf, watching her intently from beside the king's side, its dark eyes carrying something she could not quite identify, not hostility, not suspicion, something closer to recognition, as though the beast understood something about her that even she herself did not yet know. Kaelin walked beside the carriage as she was helped inside, his expression thoughtful, guarded, clearly turning over dozens of questions in his mind that he had no immediate answers for. Just before the carriage door closed, his sharp eyes met hers directly for the first time, holding her gaze with an intensity that sent an unexpected shiver through her entire body. "Whatever you are," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear, "I intend to find out." The carriage door closed, and Alara found herself being carried away from the testing grounds, away from the only life she had ever known, toward a future that had, until this very afternoon, seemed utterly impossible. Behind her, the amphitheater buzzed with frantic whispers, pack elders arguing amongst themselves, officials scrambling to record what had happened in careful, official language that could never quite capture the true weight of what everyone had witnessed. A wolfless girl, abandoned as an infant, had made the ancient altar glow gold for the first time in centuries. And the Alpha King's beast, feared throughout 5 kingdoms for its ferocity, had bowed before her without hesitation. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not for Alara, not for the kingdom, and certainly not for the young king now watching the carriage disappear down the winding road toward his royal keep, his mind racing with questions he was determined to answer no matter what the cost. The royal keep rose from the hillside like a fortress carved from the mountain itself, its stone towers stretching toward a darkening sky as the carriage rolled through the outer gates. Alara had never seen anything so imposing in her entire life. The towering walls, the countless guards stationed along every corridor, the sheer weight of power radiating from every corner of the ancient structure. She was led through winding stone hallways by a quiet, efficient servant woman who offered no explanation for where they were going, only gentle instructions to follow closely and keep her hands visible at all times. Elara obeyed, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened at the testing grounds. The golden light, the kneeling wolf, the sharp, searching gaze of the Alpha King. She was brought to a small, comfortable chamber near the eastern wing of the keep, furnished simply, but far more elegantly than anything she had ever known in Mira's modest cottage. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, and a tray of food had been left on a small wooden table, though Elara's stomach was too tight with nervous energy to consider eating anything at all. She had barely settled onto the edge of the bed when a sharp knock sounded at the door, followed immediately by its opening, revealing Kalen Thorne standing in the doorway, his expression still carrying the same guarded intensity she had witnessed at the testing grounds. "I trust the chamber is adequate," he said, though his tone suggested the question was merely formality, rather than genuine concern for her comfort. "It is more than adequate," Elara replied carefully, rising to her feet out of some instinctive sense of respect, though she quickly wondered if that was the wrong response entirely, given everything that had happened. Kalen studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes moving over her face, as though searching for something hidden beneath her calm exterior. "I have many questions," he said finally, stepping further into the room, though he left the door open behind him, a small gesture that Elara noted with quiet relief. "I have very few answers," she said honestly. "I do not understand what happened at the altar, any more than you do. You expect me to believe that a wolfless girl, abandoned as an infant, simply happened to trigger a reaction from the ancient altar that has not occurred in centuries?" Kalen's voice carried a sharp edge of skepticism, though Elara noticed something else beneath it as well, something closer to genuine curiosity fighting against his natural caution. "I do not expect you to believe anything," Elara replied, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the nervous energy still coursing through her. "I only know what I have experienced, which is very little beyond a life of being told I am different, wrong, cursed. I have no explanation for what happened today, because I have spent my entire life believing I had no wolf spirit at all." Kalen moved closer, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though something stubborn within her refused to break the eye contact. "My beast has never bowed to anyone," he said quietly. "Not once, not even during my own coronation ceremony, when tradition demanded a show of submission before the gathered pack elders. He has always been fierce, controlled only through years of careful bonding between us. Yet the moment he saw you, he knelt without hesitation." "I do not know why," Elara admitted. "I felt something strange when I first saw him, a kind of pull I cannot properly explain, but I have no understanding of what it means." A soft growl echoed from the hallway outside, and moments later, the great black wolf padded into the room, moving with quiet, deliberate grace, despite its massive size. Elara felt her heart rate spike as the creature approached her directly, ignoring Kalen entirely, its dark eyes fixed on her with unmistakable focus. "Careful," Kalen warned, though he made no move to intervene, watching closely as his beast approached her. The wolf stopped just a few feet away, studying her for a long moment, before lowering its massive head and gently nudging her hand with its nose, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Elara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, without fully understanding why. She reached out slowly, hesitantly, and rested her palm against the wolf's dark fur, feeling a strange warmth pass between them, similar to the sensation she had felt at the altar, though gentler now, quieter. Kalen watched this exchange with an expression Elara could not quite read, something between fascination and wariness, as though he were witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he understood about his own bond with his beast. "He has never allowed anyone else to touch him this way," Kalen said quietly. "Not my closest advisors, not even members of my own family." "I do not understand it either," Elara admitted, still stroking the wolf's fur gently, feeling the creature lean into her touch with obvious contentment. "I have never been near a wolf spirit before. I did not think I was capable of connecting with one at all." Kalen was quiet for a long moment, watching the strange scene unfolding before him with careful, guarded attention. Whatever suspicion he had carried into the room seemed to be slowly giving way to something more complicated, a reluctant curiosity he could not entirely suppress, despite his natural caution. "Tell me about your life," he said finally, surprising her with the sudden shift in his tone. Quieter now, less formal. Before today, before any of this happened, Alara hesitated, uncertain how much to share with a man she had only just met. A man who held immense power over her entire future. But something in his expression, a flicker of genuine interest beneath the careful authority, encouraged her to speak honestly. She told him about Mira, about the small cottage on the border between Packlands and Human Village, about the years of whispers and isolation she had endured simply for being different. She spoke carefully about her strange healing abilities, her unsettling capacity to sense emotions in others, though she left out any mention of her abandonment as an infant, uncertain whether he already knew that particular detail of her past. Kalen listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful as she spoke, occasionally glancing down at his beast, still resting contentedly beneath her hand, as though searching for some kind of confirmation or explanation in the creature's calm behavior. "You have lived a difficult life," he said finally, when she had finished speaking. "I have survived it," Alara replied simply, without self-pity, merely stating a fact she had long since accepted. Something shifted in Kalen's expression at her response, a subtle softening that surprised her, given his reputation for fierce, unyielding authority. "Most people in your position would have expected sympathy, perhaps even used their circumstances to gain favor," he observed quietly. "I do not want your sympathy," Alara said, a flash of quiet defiance rising within her despite her exhaustion. "I want to understand what happened today, and I want to know what happens next, both to me and to Mira, who raised me with nothing but kindness, despite the cruelty of everyone else around us." Kalen studied her for a long moment, something like genuine respect flickering behind his sharp eyes. "Your guardian has already been sent for," he said. "She should arrive within the hour. As for what happens next, I intend to consult with my most trusted advisors regarding your unusual connection to the altar and to my beast. Until we understand more, you will remain here at the keep, under my protection." "Am I a prisoner?" Alara asked directly, unwilling to accept vague reassurances without clarity. "You are a guest," Kalen replied, though his tone carried a seriousness that suggested the distinction mattered greatly to him. "But I will not lie to you. Whatever happened today has drawn significant attention, and not everyone within these walls will view your presence favorably. For your own safety, I would advise caution until we understand more." Alara absorbed this information carefully, aware of the weight behind his words, the unspoken warning about the political complexities she had unknowingly stepped into. She had spent her entire life trying to remain invisible, unnoticed, safe from the judgment of others. Now, in the span of a single afternoon, she had become the center of attention within the most powerful kingdom in the wolf world. The great black wolf shifted beneath her hand, letting out a soft, contented sound, and Alara found herself smiling faintly, despite the uncertainty pressing down on her from every direction. Whatever strange connection existed between herself and this powerful, unpredictable creature, it offered a small measure of comfort amid the chaos unfolding around her. Kalen noticed the small smile, and something in his own guarded expression shifted slightly in response, though he quickly masked it behind his usual careful composure. "Rest while you can," he said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow, we begin seeking answers." As he left the room, Alara remained seated beside the great wolf, her mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. She did not yet know that the answers Kalen sought would soon arrive in the form of an old healer carrying secrets she had kept hidden for 18 long years. Secrets that would reshape everything Alara believed about her own origins and the true nature of the power now stirring quietly within her. Mira arrived at the royal keep just as the sun dipped below the horizon, her simple traveling cloak dusted with road dirt, her expression tight with barely contained worry. She was led swiftly through the winding stone corridors by a royal guard, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the imposing fortress, with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly how dangerous this place could be for someone like Alara. When she was finally brought to the chamber, where Alara waited, the old healer rushed forward immediately, pulling the young woman into a tight embrace, relief flooding her weathered features. "Are you harmed?" Mira asked, pulling back just enough to study Alara's face carefully, checking for any sign of injury or distress. "I am unharmed," Alara assured her, though her voice carried the exhaustion of everything she had endured that day. "But Mira, something happened at the testing altar. something I cannot explain. Before Mira could respond, the chamber door opened once more, revealing Calen Thorne standing in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral as he studied the reunion between Healer and Ward. His great black wolf padded in behind him, moving directly toward Alara's side, as it had done throughout the evening, whenever given the opportunity. Mira's sharp eyes widened slightly at the sight of the powerful creature settling so calmly beside Alara, though she quickly composed herself, turning to face the Alpha King with the same steady composure she had maintained throughout her difficult life. "Your Majesty," Mira said, offering a respectful bow, though her tone carried none of the fearful deference most citizens displayed in his presence. "I understand my ward has caused quite a stir today." "That is one way to describe it," Calen replied, moving further into the room, his eyes moving between Mira and Alara with obvious curiosity. "The altar responded to her in a manner unprecedented in centuries, and my own beast has shown her a level of submission I have never witnessed toward anyone beyond myself." Mira was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face carrying the weight of a decision she had clearly been dreading for many years. She glanced at Alara, then back to the king, before finally releasing a slow, heavy breath. "I believe it is time you both learned the truth," Mira said quietly, "a truth I have kept hidden for 18 years, believing it safer to protect Alara, through ignorance, rather than risk the dangers that knowledge might bring." Alara felt her heart quicken at these words, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension building within her chest. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mira moved to sit at the small wooden table near the fireplace, gesturing for Alara and Calen to join her. Once they had settled, the old healer began speaking, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was about to reveal. 18 years ago, I found you abandoned beneath an old oak tree at the border of Moonfall Pack territory," Mira said, watching Alara's expression carefully as she spoke. "You had been declared wolfless at birth, and left there according to ancient pack tradition, expected either to die from exposure, or to somehow survive, through what the elders called the will of the moon." Alara felt her entire body go cold, the revelation striking her with the force of a physical blow. "I was abandoned," she whispered, "left to die." "Yes," Mira confirmed gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I found you that night, and brought you home with me, raising you as my own, ever since. I never told you the full truth because I did not wish you to carry the weight of such cruelty alongside everything else you already faced." Calen's expression had grown increasingly serious throughout Mira's explanation, his sharp eyes narrowing with obvious concern. "This tradition of abandoning wolfless infants," he said slowly, "I was not aware such a practice still existed within any of the 5 kingdoms. It is an old law, rarely invoked because wolfless births are exceedingly rare," Mira explained. "But Moonfall Pack has always held tightly to ancient traditions, even those that modern packs have long since abandoned as unnecessarily cruel." "Who were my parents?" Alara asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her attempt to remain composed. Mira hesitated for just a moment before continuing. "I never learned their names with certainty, though I have my suspicions, based on what little I overheard from the guards who left you at the border that night. But there is more you must understand, something far more significant than simply the circumstances of your abandonment." Alara waited, her entire body tense with anticipation, while Mira gathered her thoughts carefully before continuing. "I do not believe you were ever truly wolfless," Mira said finally. "I believe you carry an extraordinarily rare bloodline, one so old that most pack historians have forgotten it ever existed. There are ancient texts, fragments really, that speak of beings called voiceless alphas, individuals whose wolf spirits are so immensely powerful that they remain completely dormant from birth, invisible to ordinary testing methods, until awakened by a bond of profound significance." Calen straightened in his seat, his sharp eyes fixed intently on Mira as she spoke, clearly recognizing the weight of what she was describing. "I have heard whispers of such legends," he said slowly, "though I always believed them to be nothing more than old stories, exaggerated tales passed down through generations, without any basis in actual fact. Legends often contain grains of truth buried beneath layers of embellishment," Mira replied. "I believe Alara's dormant wolf spirit remained completely hidden throughout her entire childhood, specifically because no bond powerful enough to awaken it had yet occurred. Ordinary testing methods, designed to detect wolf spirits present from birth, would never have revealed something that exists in such a deeply dormant state. But the altar reacted to her today, Kaelin said, and so did my own beast. Precisely, Mira confirmed, her eyes moving thoughtfully between the young king and her ward. According to the old texts I studied many years ago, a voiceless alpha's dormant spirit can only be stirred by encountering a bond of extraordinary strength, typically described as a bond with someone of equal or even greater power. Your Majesty, your own beast is renowned throughout the 5 kingdoms for its exceptional strength and fierce independence. Perhaps its very presence, its proximity to Alara, was enough to begin stirring what has lain dormant within her for 18 years. The room fell into stunned silence as the full weight of this revelation settled over everyone present. Alara stared down at her own hands, trying to process the idea that she might carry a bloodline so rare, so ancient, that it had been reduced to little more than forgotten legend within the pack world. If this is true, Kaelin said slowly, his voice carrying careful deliberation, it would explain everything that occurred today. But it also raises significant concerns. A dormant power of this magnitude, once fully awakened, could prove unpredictable, even dangerous, if not properly understood and guided. I am aware of the risks, Mira said calmly, which is precisely why I chose to keep this knowledge hidden for so long. I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Alara might live a quiet life, without ever needing to confront the full weight of what she might become. That hope is no longer possible, Kaelin observed quietly. Word of what happened at the testing grounds has already spread throughout the kingdom. Every pack elder, every noble family, every citizen present today witnessed the altar's reaction and my beast's submission. There is no returning to quiet obscurity now. Alara felt the truth of his words settle heavily upon her, the realization that whatever quiet, hidden life she had once known had ended entirely the moment her palm touched that glowing altar. She looked up, meeting Kaelin's steady gaze directly. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Kaelin was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully before responding. Now, we proceed with extreme caution, he said finally. I will need to consult further with trusted advisors regarding the full implications of an awakening voiceless alpha bloodline within my kingdom, particularly given the current political tensions surrounding the rogue shifter threat. In the meantime, you will remain here at the royal keep, under careful protection. Mira reached over, squeezing Alara's hand gently, offering silent reassurance despite the uncertainty hanging heavily in the air around them. Whatever comes next, the old healer said quietly, you are not alone in facing it. Alara nodded, drawing strength from the old healer's steady presence, though she could not shake the growing awareness that her entire world had shifted irrevocably in the span of a single day. The great black wolf shifted beside her once more, resting its heavy head gently against her knee, as though offering its own silent reassurance amid the swirling uncertainty of everything still to come. Outside the chamber walls, word of the day's extraordinary events had already begun spreading rapidly throughout the royal keep and beyond, carried by servants, guards, and nobles alike, each version growing more exaggerated with every retelling. And among those hearing the news with particular interest were several powerful figures within the royal court who viewed the sudden emergence of an awakening voiceless alpha as either a fascinating curiosity or a dangerous threat to the carefully maintained order they had spent years working to protect. Within 3 days, news of what had happened at the testing grounds had reached every corner of the 5 kingdoms, growing more distorted and dramatic with each retelling. By the time the story reached the farthest territories, some versions claimed the wolfless girl had summoned dark magic to control the Alpha King's beast, while others insisted she was secretly a rogue shifter, sent to infiltrate the royal keep and destabilize the kingdom from within. Within the royal court itself, opinions divided sharply along old, familiar lines. Traditionalist nobles, deeply invested in maintaining the established hierarchy of pack bloodlines and inherited power, viewed Alara's sudden emergence with open hostility, seeing her as a direct threat to the carefully ordered world they had spent generations protecting. Chief among these voices was Lady Seraphine Vale, a noblewoman of considerable influence who had long been expected to become Kaelin's mate, their families having maintained close political ties for decades. She was beautiful and sharp-witted, accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted through careful manipulation of court politics, and she viewed Alara's arrival at the royal keep as an unacceptable disruption to plans she had spent years carefully arranging. "This is absurd," Seraphine said sharply, pacing the length of her private chamber, while her closest confidant, a beta named Corwin Ashby, watched with careful, calculating eyes. A wolfless nobody, raised by some forest healer, suddenly claiming to possess an ancient bloodline that conveniently explains away her unnatural connection to the king's beast? It is far too convenient to be believed. The king seems inclined to believe it regardless, Corwin observed carefully, his tone measured despite the tension evident in Seraphine's sharp gestures. He has kept her at the royal keep for 3 days now, consulting privately with his advisors regarding the historical texts the healer referenced. Then we must ensure his belief does not solidify into something more permanent, Seraphine replied, her eyes narrowing with cold determination. If word spreads that this girl might somehow be considered a suitable match for the king, everything I have worked toward for the past 5 years will collapse entirely. What do you propose? Corwin asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer would involve considerable risk. We discredit her, Seraphine said simply. Every ancient legend can be manipulated, twisted, made to seem sinister rather than miraculous, if presented to the right audience with the proper framing, and if discrediting her proves insufficient, we ensure she simply disappears from the royal keep entirely, one way or another. Corwin's expression tightened slightly at this last suggestion, though he said nothing to openly object, understanding the dangerous consequences of challenging Seraphine's ambitions directly. Meanwhile, within the royal keep, Alara had spent the past 3 days growing increasingly aware of the tension surrounding her presence. Servants whispered when they believed she could not hear them. Nobles regarded her with open suspicion whenever she passed through the corridors. Only Kaelin and a small handful of trusted advisors treated her with anything resembling genuine consideration. She spent much of her time in the keep's extensive library, accompanied always by the great black wolf, poring over ancient texts alongside Mira and a scholarly advisor named Osric, who had dedicated decades to studying obscure pack histories and legends. Together, they searched for any additional information regarding the voiceless Alpha bloodline, hoping to better understand what might come next as her dormant power continued stirring within her. Here, Osric said one afternoon, sliding a heavy, leather-bound volume across the table toward Alara and Mira. This passage describes the awakening process in greater detail than anything else I have found thus far. Alara leaned forward, reading the faded, ancient script carefully. The passage described how a voiceless Alpha's dormant spirit would gradually stir over time, once triggered by a bond of sufficient strength, growing stronger through continued proximity and connection, until eventually reaching a point of complete awakening, typically triggered by moments of extreme emotional or physical intensity. It says here that the awakening is often accompanied by physical sensations, Alara read aloud, tremors, warmth, occasionally vivid dreams or visions, connected to the bonded individual. Mira nodded thoughtfully. Have you experienced anything of this nature since arriving at the keep? Alara hesitated before answering, aware of how strange her next words might sound. Sometimes, when I am near Kaelin, or even simply thinking about him, I feel a strange warmth spreading through my chest, almost like a heartbeat that is not entirely my own. I assumed it was simply nervousness, given everything that has happened. Osric's eyes brightened with obvious excitement at this admission. That aligns precisely with the descriptions found in these ancient texts. Your dormant spirit is indeed responding to your growing bond with the king, exactly as the old legends predicted. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a royal guard, his expression tense with urgency. Forgive the intrusion, he said quickly, but Lady Alara is requested immediately in the eastern courtyard. There has been an incident. Alara rose immediately, her heart pounding with sudden alarm, following the guard swiftly through the winding corridors, toward the eastern courtyard, Mira and the great black wolf keeping pace closely beside her. When they arrived, she found a small crowd of guards and servants gathered around what appeared to be a collapsed section of stone wall, rubble scattered across the courtyard, where a walkway had clearly given way unexpectedly. Kaelin stood at the center of the commotion, his expression tight with barely controlled anger, directing guards to search the surrounding area carefully. What happened? Alara asked, moving toward him quickly. Sabotage, Kaelin replied grimly, his sharp eyes scanning the damaged wall. The support structure beneath this walkway was deliberately weakened, Had anyone been walking through here at the wrong moment, they could have been seriously injured. Was anyone hurt? Alara asked, her stomach twisting with sudden fear. Fortunately, no, Kalen said, though his tone remained grim. But this walkway leads directly toward the chamber where you have been staying, Alara. I do not believe this was a random accident. Alara felt a cold chill settle over her, as the implication of his words sank in fully. Someone within the royal keep, someone with access to sensitive areas and enough knowledge of structural engineering to sabotage a section of wall, had deliberately targeted her. Who would do such a thing? She asked quietly. Though she suspected she already understood the answer, involved political motivations far beyond her full comprehension. I intend to find out, Kalen said firmly, his eyes hardening with determination. Until I do, your safety becomes my highest priority. I will be assigning additional guards to your chamber immediately, and I would ask that you avoid moving through the keep without accompaniment for the time being. Alara nodded, though the reality of the situation settled heavily upon her. She had spent her entire life as an outcast, forgotten and dismissed by nearly everyone around her. Now, suddenly, she had become important enough that someone was willing to risk serious harm simply to remove her from the equation entirely. That evening, as she sat alone in her chamber, the great black wolf resting protectively at her feet, Alara found herself staring into the fireplace, turning over the events of the past few days with growing unease. She had never asked for any of this, had never sought power or attention or the complicated political intrigue now swirling around her existence within the royal keep. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, followed by Kalen's voice requesting entry. She permitted him inside, noting the exhaustion evident in his expression, the weight of leadership pressing visibly upon him after the day's troubling events. I wanted to check on you personally, he said, settling into the chair across from her, though his posture remained tense, alert. I am unharmed, Alara assured him, though her voice carried the fatigue of everything she had endured. Though I confess, I did not expect my presence here to place anyone else in danger. You did not create this danger, Kalen said firmly. Whoever sabotaged that walkway made their own choice, driven by fear or ambition, or perhaps both. You bear no responsibility for the actions of others. Alara studied him carefully, noting the sincerity in his tone, the way his sharp eyes had softened slightly as he spoke. Why do you care so much about my safety? She asked directly, unable to suppress her curiosity any longer. You barely know me. 3 days ago, you were prepared to view me with the same suspicion as everyone else. Kalen was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully before responding. My beast has never shown submission to anyone but myself, not once, in all the years I have carried this responsibility, he said slowly. Whatever connection exists between us, I do not yet fully understand it, but I know enough to recognize that dismissing it, or dismissing you, would be a mistake I am not prepared to make. Something warm stirred within Alara's chest at his words, that same strange sensation Osric's ancient texts had described, a warmth that felt entirely separate from mere nervousness or gratitude. She said nothing, though her eyes remained locked with his for a long, charged moment, before the great black wolf shifted between them, breaking the tension with a soft, contented sigh. Neither of them spoke of what that moment might mean, though both recognized, in their own quiet ways, that whatever bond was slowly forming between them, it was growing stronger with each passing day, regardless of the danger and uncertainty surrounding them both. Over the following weeks, the sabotage incident proved to be only the first of several unsettling events within the royal keep. A small fire broke out near the library, where Alara had been studying with Osric, quickly extinguished before causing serious damage, though the guards who investigated found clear evidence it had been deliberately set. Then, a poisoned dish mysteriously appeared among the food prepared for Alara's evening meal, discovered only because the great black wolf refused to allow her anywhere near the tray, growling low, and refusing to settle until the food had been removed entirely and tested by the keep's healers. Kalen grew increasingly frustrated with each incident, doubling the guards assigned to Alara's protection and launching a quiet, careful investigation into who within the keep might be responsible. Yet whoever orchestrated these attacks moved carefully, covering their tracks thoroughly enough that no clear evidence ever pointed directly to a specific culprit. Whoever is doing this understands the keep structure and routines far too well to be an outsider, Kalen said one evening, pacing the length of his private study, while Alara sat nearby, watching him with quiet concern. This points toward someone with significant access, likely someone within the noble court itself. "Do you have suspicions?" Alara asked carefully. Kalen hesitated before answering, his jaw tightening slightly. "I have suspicions, yes, though nothing I can act upon without solid proof. Accusing a powerful noble family, without clear evidence, would create far more political chaos than it would resolve, particularly during a time when unity against the rogue shifter threat remains critical." Despite the ongoing danger, Alara found herself growing steadily closer to Kalen throughout these difficult weeks. Their shared meals in his private study, becoming a quiet refuge from the tension and suspicion surrounding them elsewhere in the keep. She learned about his childhood, about the sudden loss of his father that had thrust him into leadership far earlier than he had ever expected, about the weight of responsibility he carried every single day for the well-being of 5 entire kingdoms. In turn, she shared more of her own life with him, the quiet years spent with Mira, the isolation she had endured throughout her childhood, the strange gifts she had never fully understood until now. Kalen listened with genuine attentiveness, asking thoughtful questions, offering quiet understanding, rather than the pity or suspicion she had grown so accustomed to receiving from nearly everyone else in her life. The strange warmth Alara had described to Mira and Osric continued growing stronger with each passing day, particularly whenever she found herself near Kalen. She began experiencing subtle tremors deep within her chest during their conversations, a sensation almost like a second heartbeat stirring softly beneath her own, growing more pronounced whenever their eyes met for longer than a passing moment. One evening, as they sat together in his private study, the fire casting warm light across the room while the great black wolf dozed contentedly nearby, Alara felt the tremor intensify suddenly, sharp enough to make her gasp softly and press a hand against her chest. "Alara?" Kalen asked immediately, his relaxed posture snapping instantly into alert concern. "What is wrong?" "I do not know," she admitted, her breath coming quicker than usual. "Something feels different, stronger than before." Kalen moved closer, kneeling beside her chair, his sharp eyes studying her carefully. "Describe what you are feeling," he instructed gently. "A warmth," Alara said slowly, trying to put words to the strange sensation building within her. "Like something is waking up, stretching after a very long sleep. It is stronger now than it has ever been." Kalen reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering near hers before gently taking it, as though testing whether the contact might intensify whatever was happening within her. The moment his fingers closed around hers, Alara gasped again, the warmth in her chest surging sharply, spreading outward through her entire body in a wave of intense, overwhelming sensation. The great black wolf lifted its head suddenly, ears pricked forward, dark eyes fixed intently on the two of them, as though sensing the shift happening between them. A soft, low sound rumbled from deep within its chest, not quite a growl, something closer to recognition, perhaps even approval. "What is happening to me?" Alara whispered, her voice trembling slightly, as the sensation continued building, refusing to fade. "I believe," Kalen said quietly, his own voice carrying an unusual note of wonder beneath his careful composure, "that whatever dormant spirit lives within you is responding to our growing connection, exactly as Osric's ancient texts predicted." Alara closed her eyes, focusing inward on the strange warmth spreading through her body, trying to understand the sensation rather than fight against it. Slowly, gradually, the intensity began to settle, though it did not fade away entirely, remaining instead like a quiet, steady presence deep within her chest, different from anything she had felt before. When she opened her eyes again, she found Kalen watching her, with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something soft and unguarded beneath his usual careful authority. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. "I believe so," Alara replied, still catching her breath slightly. "Whatever that was, it has passed for now, though I sense it remains closer to the surface than before." Neither of them moved to release the other's hand, the quiet warmth of the moment stretching comfortably between them despite the uncertainty surrounding everything else happening within the keep. The great black wolf settled back down with a contented sigh, apparently satisfied that whatever had occurred posed no danger. "This bond between us grows stronger each day," Kalen observed quietly, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across the back of her hand. "I confess, I did not anticipate feeling this way," when I first brought you to the keep out of simple curiosity and caution. Nor did I, Elara admitted softly. I have spent my entire life believing myself unwanted, unworthy of genuine connection with anyone. This is unfamiliar territory for me. For me as well, Kaelin said, surprising her with his own vulnerability. I have spent years guarding myself carefully, wary of forming attachments that political circumstances might later force me to abandon. Yet with you, I find myself unwilling to maintain that same careful distance. Word of their growing closeness inevitably began spreading throughout the royal court, adding fresh fuel to the already simmering tensions surrounding Alara's presence within the keep. Lady Seraphine, upon hearing whispered accounts of private meetings and lingering glances shared between the king and the wolfless girl, felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling further with each passing day. We can no longer wait for the right opportunity to discredit her, Seraphine told Corwin one evening, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. If this bond continues deepening, the king may act rashly, perhaps even declare her his intended mate, before we have time to properly intervene. The sabotage attempts have failed to remove her, Corwin observed carefully. Continued attempts risk drawing suspicion directly toward us, particularly given the king's ongoing investigation. Then we require a different approach, Seraphine said coldly, her mind already turning over new possibilities. If we cannot remove her quietly, perhaps we must instead ensure that whatever power she carries becomes something the kingdom fears rather than celebrates. Fear is a far more powerful tool than simple sabotage, particularly when properly directed toward an entire kingdom already anxious about rogue shifter threats. Unaware of the dangerous scheming unfolding within the royal court, Elara continued spending her evenings with Kaelin, their bond deepening steadily, despite the political tension surrounding them. She did not yet know that the true test of this growing connection, and of the ancient power stirring within her, would arrive far sooner than anyone within the keep anticipated, in circumstances more dangerous than any sabotage attempt or political scheme could have prepared her for. The attack came without warning, shattering the fragile peace of an otherwise ordinary evening within the royal keep. Elara had been walking through the eastern courtyard alongside Kaelin, the great black wolf trailing beside them as it always did, when the sudden sound of shattering glass and distant shouting shattered the quiet evening air. Guards began sprinting past them toward the outer walls, their expressions tight with alarm. "Rogue shifters," a guard called out breathlessly as he passed. "They have breached the eastern wall. Dozens of them, Your Majesty." Kaelin's expression hardened immediately, all traces of the softness he had shown Elara moments before vanishing beneath sharp, decisive authority. "Get Elara to safety immediately," he ordered the nearest guard, already moving toward the sound of the commotion. "I am not leaving you," Elara said firmly, refusing to be led away, despite the guard's insistent grip on her arm. "This is not the time to argue," Kaelin said sharply, though his eyes carried genuine concern beneath the urgency of the moment. "Rogue shifters show no mercy toward anyone they encounter. You must be protected." Before Elara could respond further, a group of rogue shifters burst into the courtyard, their eyes wild with the reckless aggression that had earned them their fearsome reputation throughout the Five Kingdoms. They moved without the discipline of trained pack warriors, relying instead on raw, unpredictable ferocity that made them exceptionally dangerous in close combat. Kaelin shifted immediately, his human form giving way to a massive, powerful wolf, even larger than his usual beast, dark fur bristling with barely contained fury, as he moved to intercept the attackers before they could reach Elara. The great black wolf that had accompanied them throughout the evening surged forward as well, teeth bared, positioning itself protectively between Elara and the approaching danger. The courtyard erupted into chaos, guards and rogue shifters clashing violently, while Elara found herself pressed against the stone wall, watching with growing horror as the battle unfolded around her. She had never witnessed true combat before, and the sheer intensity of it left her frozen with fear, uncertain how to help despite every instinct screaming at her to do something. Then she saw Kaelin stumble. A rogue shifter, larger and more vicious than the others, had managed to land a serious blow against him, and Kaelin collapsed heavily onto the stone ground, his powerful form struggling to rise again, as blood soaked into his dark fur. The rogue shifter advanced quickly, preparing to finish what it had started, while the remaining guards found themselves too occupied with other attackers to intervene in time. Something inside Elara snapped in that instant, a surge of fierce, protective instinct, overriding the fear that had frozen her moments before. Without conscious thought, she surged forward, placing herself directly between Kaelin and the advancing rogue shifter. The rogue shifter hesitated for just a fraction of a second, clearly confused by the sudden appearance of an unarmed woman standing defiantly in its path. That hesitation proved to be its critical mistake. Alara felt the warmth in her chest explode outward, with sudden, overwhelming force, spreading through her entire body in a wave of golden light, so bright it illuminated the entire courtyard, momentarily blinding everyone nearby. She felt her body shifting, transforming in ways she had never before experienced, ancient power surging through her veins, as though something long dormant had finally, completely awakened. When the golden light finally faded, Alara stood transformed, her human form replaced by a wolf, unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Her fur shimmered with a radiant, silvery glow, her eyes carrying an ancient wisdom and fierce power that seemed to radiate outward in waves, causing every rogue shifter nearby to freeze in place, some instinctively cowering before her overwhelming presence. The rogue shifter that had been preparing to attack Kaelin stumbled backward in obvious terror, quickly abandoning its assault entirely, joined swiftly by its companions as they recognized the impossible power now standing before them. Within moments, the remaining rogue shifters retreated entirely, scrambling back over the breached wall and disappearing into the surrounding forest, unwilling to face whatever ancient force had just revealed itself within the royal keep. Alara, still in her radiant wolf form, moved immediately to Kaelin's side, gently nudging his injured form with obvious concern. Kaelin, though weakened and bleeding, managed to shift back into his human form, staring up at her with an expression of pure astonishment. "Alara," he whispered, reaching out weakly to touch her shimmering fur. "This is you." Slowly, Alara felt her own transformation reversing, her wolf form giving way back to her human shape, though the golden warmth within her chest remained steady now, no longer stirring but settled, complete, as though whatever awakening process had begun weeks earlier had finally reached its natural conclusion. She knelt immediately beside Kaelin, examining his injuries with the same careful, practiced attention Mira had taught her since childhood. "You need immediate healing," she said urgently, pressing her hands against his wound, focusing every ounce of concentration into the task. To her own astonishment, golden light began flowing from her palms, spreading into Kaelin's injury, closing the wound with remarkable speed, far beyond even her own unusually fast healing abilities she had always possessed. Within minutes, the serious injury had reduced to nothing more than a faint scar, Kaelin's strength visibly returning as color flooded back into his face. Guards and remaining pack members gathered around them slowly, staring in stunned silence at what they had just witnessed. Word spread rapidly throughout the courtyard and beyond, carried by shocked whispers that would soon reach every corner of the royal keep and far beyond its walls. The wolfless girl, the outcast abandoned as an infant, had revealed herself to be something far greater than anyone had ever imagined, a voiceless alpha awakened fully, possessing power that rivaled even the most legendary figures from ancient pack history. Pack elders who had gathered nervously at the edges of the courtyard, elders who had spent weeks quietly supporting the traditionalist faction's suspicion toward Alara, now found themselves lowering their heads in genuine, unmistakable reverence, recognizing the undeniable truth of what they had witnessed with their own eyes. Kaelin rose slowly to his feet, his strength fully restored, and turned to face Alara directly, his expression carrying a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something deeper still, an emotion that had been quietly building between them for weeks, finally given permission to surface fully in this extraordinary moment. "You saved my life," he said quietly, reaching out to gently take her hand. "I could not have done otherwise," Alara replied simply, her voice steady, despite the overwhelming events of the past few minutes. "Whatever this power is, it belongs to protecting those I care for." Around them, the courtyard remained silent, filled with guards, pack members, and nobles alike, all staring in stunned reverence at the young woman who had, in the span of a single evening, transformed from a suspected outcast into an undeniable symbol of ancient, extraordinary power. Mira arrived moments later, having rushed from the library upon hearing news of the attack, her weathered face breaking into a proud, relieved smile as she took in the scene before her. She had waited 18 long years for this moment, the moment when Alara would finally understand the full truth of her own remarkable nature. "You have awakened fully," Mira said softly, moving to embrace her ward tightly, just as the ancient texts foretold. Alara returned the embrace, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settling over her, alongside a quiet, steady confidence she had never possessed before. Whatever came next, whatever challenges still awaited her within the complicated political landscape of the royal court, she now understood, with absolute certainty, exactly who she truly was. And standing beside her, Kaelin Thorne looked upon her with an expression that left no doubt in anyone's mind that whatever bond had begun forming between them weeks earlier had now solidified into something far more permanent, far more powerful than either of them could have anticipated when this extraordinary journey first began. In the days that followed the rogue shifter attack, the royal keep transformed entirely in its treatment of Alara. Servants who had once whispered cruelly behind her back now offered respectful bows whenever she passed. Nobles who had regarded her with open suspicion now sought her favor, eager to align themselves with the woman who had single-handedly repelled a dangerous attack and healed the Alpha King with power unmatched in centuries. Yet Alara found herself unmoved by this sudden reversal, understanding clearly that the same fickle judgment that had once condemned her could just as easily turn against her again, should circumstances shift. She remained cautious, grounded firmly in the values Mira had instilled within her throughout years of quiet, difficult living. Lady Seraphine, upon witnessing the undeniable proof of Alara's extraordinary power, quickly recognized that her plans to discredit and remove the young woman had become utterly impossible to pursue further. Faced with the reality of an entire kingdom now revering Alara as something close to legendary, Seraphine wisely chose to withdraw her ambitions entirely, quietly departing the royal court to avoid the humiliation of continued failure. Kaelin, meanwhile, moved swiftly to address the political consequences of everything that had unfolded, calling together the pack elders and noble families from across all 5 kingdoms to formally address Alara's remarkable heritage and her undeniable bond with him. "I stand before you today," Kaelin announced, during a formal gathering held within the keep's grand hall, "to declare publicly what many of you have already witnessed firsthand. Alara, once wrongfully condemned as wolfless and abandoned according to a cruel and outdated tradition, has revealed herself to be a voiceless alpha of extraordinary power, a bloodline so rare it has not been witnessed within our kingdoms for centuries." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, though this time carrying awe and respect rather than suspicion or fear. "Furthermore," Kaelin continued, his eyes finding Alara's across the grand hall, "I intend to formally recognize her as my chosen mate, a decision I make not out of political convenience, but out of genuine bond and mutual respect that has grown steadily between us since the day fate first brought us together." The announcement was met with overwhelming approval from the gathered crowd, though a small handful of traditionalist elders remained notably silent, their expressions carefully guarded despite the obvious shift in overall sentiment throughout the hall. Among those present was a figure Alara had not expected to see, a man whose face carried an unmistakable resemblance to her own features, his expression torn between shame and cautious hope as their eyes met across the crowded room. Garrick, the beta who had condemned his own infant daughter to abandonment 18 years earlier, stood among the assembled pack representatives from Moonfall Pack, having traveled to the royal keep upon hearing the extraordinary news that had spread throughout every territory. After the formal gathering concluded, Garrick approached Alara hesitantly, his usually confident demeanor replaced by visible uncertainty. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice carrying a rawness she had never expected to hear from the man responsible for her difficult beginning. "I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I believe I deserve it, but I needed you to know that not a single day has passed in 18 years without regret weighing heavily upon my conscience." Alara studied him carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions stirring within her, anger and hurt, intertwined with an unexpected flicker of understanding, for a man who had clearly struggled beneath the weight of ancient traditions he had been raised to follow without question. "You made a choice that nearly cost me my life," she said honestly, refusing to soften the truth of what had happened between them. "That is not something I can simply forget, regardless of how much regret you carry." "I understand," Garrick said quietly, lowering his eyes. However, Ilara continued, drawing upon the quiet strength Mira had cultivated within her throughout years of difficult living, I have also learned that holding on to anger serves only to poison the one who carries it. I do not offer forgiveness easily, but I am willing to allow the possibility of understanding between us, given time. Garrick's eyes lifted, carrying a fragile hope he clearly had not expected to receive. That is more grace than I have any right to ask for, he said softly. Nearby, Ilara caught sight of another familiar face, approaching cautiously. A woman whose features mirrored her own so closely that recognition struck her immediately, even before introductions were made. Wilhelmina, the mother who had fought desperately against the guards 18 years earlier, stood trembling with overwhelming emotion, tears already streaming down her weathered cheeks. "My daughter," Wilhelmina whispered, her voice breaking entirely as she took in the sight of the grown woman standing before her, alive and powerful beyond anything she could have imagined during those darkest years of grief and uncertainty. Ilara felt her own composure wavering as she looked upon her birth mother for the first time, sensing immediately the genuine anguish this woman had carried throughout nearly 2 decades of separation. Unlike Garrick, whose choices had been driven by rigid adherence to tradition and fear, Wilhelmina's every gesture spoke of a mother who had never stopped grieving the loss of her child. "I never stopped searching for word of you," Wilhelmina continued, reaching out hesitantly. "I never stopped hoping you had somehow survived." Ilara stepped forward, closing the distance between them, allowing Wilhelmina to embrace her tightly, both women overcome with the emotional weight of a reunion neither had ever truly believed possible. "I am here now," Ilara said softly, feeling genuine warmth toward this woman, in a way she had not anticipated feeling toward her birth father. In the weeks that followed, Ilara worked carefully to rebuild fragile connections with both her birth parents, choosing patience and gradual understanding over lingering resentment, guided always by Mira's steady wisdom and her own growing confidence in who she truly was. She did not forget the cruelty of her earliest days, but she chose, deliberately and consciously, not to allow that cruelty to define the woman she had become. Her bond with Kaelin continued deepening steadily. The golden warmth within her chest now settled permanently into a steady, comforting presence that connected them both in ways neither fully understood, but both cherished completely. The great black wolf, once feared throughout the kingdom for its ferocity, now moved between them both with obvious contentment, serving as a living symbol of the powerful bond uniting them. Months later, beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars and a full, radiant moon, Ilara stood before the assembled representatives of all 5 kingdoms, dressed in flowing robes woven with silver thread that caught the moonlight beautifully as she moved. Kaelin stood beside her, his expression carrying a warmth and open affection that would have seemed impossible to imagine during their first tense meeting at the testing grounds so many months before. The ceremony that united them as mates was steeped in ancient pact tradition, yet it carried new meaning entirely, symbolizing not merely a political alliance, but a genuine bond built upon mutual respect, shared hardship, and steady, growing affection. As Ilara spoke her vows, her voice carried clearly across the gathered crowd, strong and confident, in a way the frightened, isolated child she had once been could never have imagined possible. When the ceremony concluded, cheers erupted throughout the gathered crowd, pack members from every territory celebrating the union of their king with a woman whose extraordinary journey had captured the imagination and respect of the entire kingdom. Even old Bertha, the elder who had once declared Ilara's abandonment necessary for the pack's protection, stood among the celebrating crowd, her expression carrying quiet acknowledgement of how thoroughly her earlier judgment had been proven wrong. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued throughout the royal keep, Ilara found herself standing quietly on a balcony, overlooking the moonlit courtyard below, Kaelin joining her a few moments later, his arms settling comfortably around her waist, as they both gazed out at the peaceful scene stretching before them. "Do you ever think about what your life would have become?" Kaelin asked quietly, "had Mira not found you that night beneath the oak tree?" Ilara considered the question carefully before answering. "I try not to dwell on paths not taken," she said honestly. "I am grateful for the difficult journey that shaped me into who I am today, even the painful parts, because they taught me strength and compassion I might never have developed otherwise." Kaelin pulled her closer, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "The kingdom is fortunate to have you," he said softly. "As am I." Ilara smiled, leaning into his embrace, feeling the steady warmth of their bond, pulsing gently within her chest, a constant reminder of everything she had overcome, and everything still waiting to unfold in the years ahead. She had been rejected at birth, declared cursed and unworthy by those who should have protected her most. Yet through patience, resilience, and the steady kindness of those who had believed in her worth despite everything, she had emerged not merely as someone the kingdom accepted, but as someone the kingdom had come to celebrate entirely. As Alpha Queen, she vowed silently to herself that night, gazing out over the peaceful kingdom she now called home, that she would ensure no child born within these territories would ever again face the cruel judgment she had endured. Compassion, she had learned through her own difficult journey, was always a far greater strength than fear or rigid tradition could ever hope to be. And as the moon shone brightly overhead, illuminating the kingdom, now bound together under her steady, compassionate leadership alongside Kaelin, Ilara finally understood the true meaning of the star she had been named after so many years before, a light that shines brightest, precisely when everything around it has gone dark.